Topic for today is targeted risk analysis in PCI DSS 4.0. I will answer any questions that you put into the webinar at the end, and slides that I'm showing today will be sent to you at the latest by tomorrow. You can also write any kinds of comments or questions into the chat, or use the functionality of the webinar software that we're using. Yeah, maybe a few words about me. My name is Tobias Weber. I'm a managing consultant at USD in the security audits and PCI section, and I have been performing PCI DSS audits for several years now, also according to PCI 4.0. And yes, I will be guiding you through this topic today. Before we dive into the topic of targeted risk analysis, I want to say a few words to provide some context for that. Let me start with the transition timeline. So as we can see here, in March 2022, the version 4.0 of the PCI DSS has been released. The next big milestone is the sunset date for PCI DSS 3.2.1. So this was approximately 2 months ago, and here, from 1st of April 2024 on, only PCI 4.0 audits can be performed and can be reported. And the next milestone after that is the date when the future dated requirements kick in. That would be the 31st of March 2025. One of those future dated requirements is the requirement that we talk about today, which is about a targeted risk analysis. Another topic that will be important today is the so-called customized approach, which I want to compare to the defined approach in the slide. So here we see that the defined approach is basically the traditional method that has been used to assess PCI DSS requirements already in older versions of the standard. Essentially what happens here is that the wording as in the standard is what is used to define the requirement and the testing procedures. So basically you do what is set in the standard. This way you already have some direction. This is typically also the best or the right approach if you have already been PCI DSS certified and you already have implemented those requirements. With PCI 4.0 though, the PCI Council has offered a variety of methods to get some flexibility, and one of these is the customized approach. And the customized approach gives you the possibility to focus only on the objective of each requirement. So in PCI 4.0, every requirement has an objective that is defined in the standard. And with the customized approach, you can define your own control that covers this objective in the standard, as opposed to the compensating controls, which also still exist in PCI 4.0. In the customized approach, you do not need a reason why you want to do it. You just can. And one other point here is that the customized approach is typically intended to be for more risk mature entities. So if you are a bit further along in terms of risk assessments, you already have some experiences in your organization and a robust control framework, then maybe this is what you want to do, to maybe harmonize your PCI DSS controls with other controls that you have to fulfill, or yeah, maybe for similar other reasons that you have a different implementation of particular requirements. The method to use the customized approach is that typically you, as an entity that wants to fulfill PCI DSS, you define your control according to the customized approach objective. And this definition will be reviewed by your assessor, and your assessor will derive testing procedures from your defined customized approach control to validate that the customized approach has been implemented correctly and so on. Typically here you have increased efforts in terms of documentation and in terms of testing. And not all requirements are eligible for the customized approach. So there's some where this is just not possible. But those are relatively few, and most requirements are eligible, and you can use the customized approach in these requirements. One additional thing that you have to do, though, is you have to perform a targeted risk analysis for each requirement where you use the customized approach. And this is something that we will get into a little bit more detail about in a few minutes. So the main requirement that we want to talk about today is requirement 12.3. This is about risks, and that risks to the cardholder data environment are formally identified, evaluated, and managed. This requirement has 4 components, or 4 sub-requirements. One part of it is that it has sub-requirements 12.3.1 and 12.3.2, which are about requirements that provide flexibility. So in 12.3.1, you have to perform a risk assessment or risk analysis for any requirements that provide some flexibility in terms of frequency of the performance of other controls. And in 12.3.2, you have to perform a targeted risk analysis in terms of for the measures that you use for the customized approach. So these are the 2 main options. You have to get some flexibility in PCI 4.0. And whenever you use any of these possibilities, you need to use the customized approach as a kind of baseline, as a kind of framework to argue that the choices you make here are help your security stance and help you achieve PCI DSS compliance. The other part here is that the requirement provides you a framework for cryptographic agility and for lifecycle management. So for ensuring that the cryptographic algorithms, protocols, and so on that you use are supporting you also in the future, and that the assets that you use, software, hardware, will be receiving security patches in the future. Those are basically the other 2 sub-requirements, 12.3.3 and 12.3.4. One question one can ask themselves when looking at this requirement, in particular if you've done PCI DSS before, already in version 3.2.1, is how is this different to what was required before? So let's talk about that. Here we have the targeted risk analysis on the left side. This is basically the implementation of the PCI 4.0 requirement that we've just looked at. It has a focus on the 4 different parts that we just looked at and that we just went through. and it's really targeted towards single requirements in a way. On the other side, we have the risk assessment, which is the overarching process. And this is basically what was required in PCI DSS 3.2.1. Here you have the general risk assessment process in the enterprise, and the granularity of this was not really defined in such detail. This might have included PCI DSS. In most cases, it did not include single requirements for most organizations. Yeah, the overarching risk process is not really in the scope of PCI DSS anymore with version 4.0, but really these granular focused area targeted risk analysis parts are what PCI DSS talks about in version 4.0. Maybe to put also that into some context, I have visualized the risk assessment process here. So we have as a first step on the left side in the orange box, the definition of risk assessment process. So here you would use your octave or the methodology that is recommended by NIST or by any other organization as a methodology for your risk assessment and your risk management. And then the next step would be to identify which risks you have. Typically, you want to do this with your process owners, product owners, asset owners, and business to see what kind of threats there are. And in the second step, you want to identify where you have potential losses from those threats, so what the impact would be. Also, this you want to verify, find out with process owners, product owners, asset owners. And then you have a kind of update cycle where you perform the risk assessment, find out what risk there is. If the risk is not acceptable to you, then you need to perform some kind of risk mitigation. Typically, you find out what kinds of methods for risk mitigation there are with the people that you identify the risk with. Then according to the methodology that you used before, you determine what the residual risk is with the additional controls that you put in as risk mitigation. And what happens in PCI 4.0 with this targeted risk analysis is that you really have some topics, for example, let's say the frequency of anti-malware scans, that you have to consider in your risk assessment, and the risk mitigation that you define here, the frequency of your malware scans, is then the outcome or what you support with your targeted risk analysis. The verification of the residual risk is in a way what the PCI DSS auditor does then. This is really how this targeted risk analysis comes into this risk assessment process. Typically, this is something that you want to do in this kind of circular way, that you repeat this process over and over because you want to update your risks regularly, because of course your environment changes and also the threat landscape changes, also the impact that those threats might have on your environment changes. This is also reflected in the PCI DSS requirement, as you have to perform this targeted risk analysis not only once, but you have to perform it regularly. So let's get into the different parts of the requirement. Here we see requirement 2.3.1, so the first sub-requirement of 12.3. Says that for each requirement that provides some flexibility and how frequently it is performed, you need to support these choices with a targeted risk analysis. So the purpose is of course quite clear. It is that you use up-to-date knowledge and an assessment of risks for the CDE and to protect it. And the focus of the sub-requirement here is of course on requirements that provide some flexibility. You evaluate each requirement that provides such a flexibility and determine the corresponding frequency. So this would be your risk mitigation in a way. And yeah, PCI DSS also recommends some risk assessment and management processes or frameworks such as by NIST or in the ISO world here. So let's look at the requirements that are really targeted here. On the slide, you see on the left side the requirement number. In the middle, we see the topic that is addressed by the requirement. And on the right side, you see a recommendation from me, which is based on what has been required by PCI 3.2.1 or on what I typically see in organizations that I assess. And this is just to be taken as a recommendation, maybe as a starting point, because really what you want to do is, of course, you want to assess the risk that you have in your environment. And this can, of course, be individually different. So maybe not every frequency here makes sense. Maybe some of them need to be much more tight. Maybe some of them do not need to be as tight because maybe the threat landscape that you're looking at is different than from what I assumed here. But these, I think, can be taken as a kind of baseline. So the first requirement here is 5.2.3.1. This is about the periodic evaluation of any system components that have been identified to not be at risk from malware. So this, for many organizations, this would be, for example, your mainframe systems, or for some also Linux systems. This is always debatable, I would say. And the typical recommendation here is to re-verify this annually. The next requirement, 5.3.2.1, says that you should perform malware scans, and this is of course for all other systems, for those systems that are typically impacted by malware. And the frequency of those scans is something that you can also set with a targeted risk analysis. My recommendation here is to perform those scans daily. I think that is, depending on the system, quite reasonable. Maybe for some systems you all even want to perform scans more frequently. As I said, this really depends on the threat landscape that you're looking at. Requirement 7.2.5.1 is about reviewing access privileges for application and system accounts. Such privileges, it makes sense to review them in a cycle, of course. This is what the requirement wants you to do. And I think a quarterly cycle is reasonable here. Maybe yeah, it makes sense to align this kind of with the cycle that you use for personal accounts. Yeah, but you have some flexibility here. Requirement 8.6.3 says that passphrases should be changed periodically. Here PCI 3.2.1 required this to be every 90 days. Correspondingly, the recommendation that I put here is quarterly, but again, this really depends on the current stance that you have. How long, complex are your passwords? Are there maybe other factors that go into this? Do you maybe have even other controls in place? This is all something that might go into this risk assessment. In requirement 9.5.1.2.1, we define the frequency for periodic POI device inspections to verify that they have not been manipulated. This is something that in a lot of environments you want to do daily, maybe when you open shop, combined with other checks that you typically have to do. For some environments, for example, for remote or relatively remote payment automata or so, you maybe want to do this, or self-service stations, you want to do this in a more, maybe on once a week or when they're serviced or in some fashion like that. Requirement 10.4.2.1 says that you should review all logs that are not covered in requirement 10.4.1 regularly. Here my recommendation would also be to do this daily. It is actually quite rare to see organizations that treat different logs differently in this way, especially since with PCI 4.0 you have to have an automatic log review anyway. So I think a daily log review only makes sense here. 11.3.1.1 says that all other vulnerabilities, so those that are not high risk or critical, these are the ones that you should have, that you had to manage in the old version of the standard already, need to be managed. And here the recommendation to address those vulnerabilities would be 6 months from my side. This, however, really depends on the vulnerability too. So maybe you want to do this in even a more granular fashion and to treat maybe medium vulnerabilities earlier and maybe low and informational vulnerabilities. Give them more time or give them the 6 months. This really also maybe depends on what kind of system you're looking at. The last requirement here is 11.6.1. This is about the change and tamper detection mechanism for your payment pages. This is also something that I would recommend to do daily. But again, here it really depends on what kind of mechanism you're looking at, and maybe also what other controls you have in place to detect this kind of tampering or to prevent it. So yeah, here you also want to, of course, to do a targeted risk analysis to verify that and only take the daily as a kind of baseline. The next sub-requirement that we have here is requirement 12.3.2. This says that a targeted risk analysis needs to be performed for every requirement, each PCI DSS requirement, where you use the customized approach to meet it. Purpose, of course, is that you need you want to do this for the customized approach. So this is also a requirement that you cannot meet using the customized approach. The good practice here is to use the Appendix E or a similar methodology to perform this risk assessment or this risk analysis. And into this Appendix E, which is the kind of form that the PCI Council recommends, I want to deep dive a little bit. I want to go through this with you just to show you what the kind of expectation that the Council has regarding such a targeted risk analysis is. So here we have the first part of this Appendix E, which tells you how you should perform such a targeted risk analysis. First part here is to identify the requirement. So identify the requirement as it is written, identify the objective, so the intention of the requirement, and you should also describe the mischief, so the kind of danger that the requirement was designed to prevent. In the second part, you should describe your proposed solution. So this is really the core of what the customized approach is. So you want to define what the name of your customized control is. You want to define what parts of the requirement your customized approach targets. And you want to define how this customized approach, how your solution prevents the dangers that are addressed or the mischief that is addressed by the original requirement. In the third part, we start with the likelihood, so the first part of our risk analysis. Yeah, first of all, you go through the control matrix. This is one of the documents that you need to have for every customized approach that you define. And in the second part, you want to describe any kind of mischief that might still occur, even though your customized control is in place. So what residual risk is there? Then you should define whether mischief with your customized approach control is more likely to occur if there's no change, or if it's less likely to occur than compared to the traditional approach. And you should provide a reasoning why your assessment that you made regarding the likelihood is the way it is. As a next part, we have the impact, of course. So here you base the council wants you to base the definition that you made, or the judgment that you made on the number of stored cardholder card numbers and the number of transmitted cardholder numbers in credit card numbers in a 12-month period. And you should define on how the customized control will either reduce the number of PANs compromised or allow for a quicker notification when there is any kind of compromise to reduce the amount of PANs that are impacted. In the last part here, we have the approval and review. So each targeted risk analysis in this way should be approved by by executive management. And additionally, there should be, as I mentioned already, a kind of update cycle. So you should define when the customized, when your risk analysis will be updated next. So when you will review this risk analysis next time to address any kind of changes that have maybe occurred in your environment or in the threat landscape and so on. As a next sub-requirement, we have 12.3.3. This sub-requirement is about cryptographic cipher suites and protocols that are in use, and those should be reviewed at least every 12 months. Purpose is, of course, that the protocols and encryption strengths might change and might be deprecated due to vulnerabilities or design flaws. This is something that happens basically all the time, that there are some changes in what should be or what should not be used anymore, let's say it like that. And a good practice is, of course, to have some kind of cryptographic agility, is what the council calls it here, to be able or to plan correctly when and how you are going to upgrade your cryptographic infrastructure, because typically it is not easy to just change a cryptographic cipher suite or protocol. In a lot of cases, especially if these are with external partners, you need to talk to the or communicate to the other side that you want to change the protocol. They need to be able to support this change, and yes, this is the main reason why you really need to have some planning here and what the requirement wants to address. I put some best practices for you here. So the first step that you want to do to support this cryptographic agility and to perform the process that is defined in this requirement is you want to have an inventory of really all cryptographic algorithms that you're using and where you're using them. So really to understand your environment and to have the current state that is really up to date. In the next step, you want to review this current state, this inventory regularly. And here you, of course, should be aware of changes in your environment. But what you want to compare them to is changes made by vendors or by regulatory bodies such as NIST or other national bodies to find out that some cryptographic algorithm should not be used anymore or should only be used for decryption but not for encryption anymore, and so on. And the third part here is, of course, to act accordingly. So when you find out that something should not be used anymore or that this algorithm will likely be deprecated within the next 7 years, you should make a corresponding plan to migrate away from using that algorithm and to use probably newer algorithms or more stable algorithms that can be supported in the future, and to have some kind of plan to communicate this plan with your business partners, and so on. One document that I want to particularly stress here is the document transitioning the use of cryptographic algorithms in key lengths by NIST. This is also one of the documents that the requirement refers to. And this is what should be used as a kind of guidance here. To get to the last sub-requirement that we have, requirement 12.3.4. This is about hardware and software technologies that should be reviewed every 12 months. So here you want to find out what hardware and what software is outdated or is going to be outdated so that you can act early on that and create corresponding plans to review, remove or replace or upgrade those components. Good practice, of course, is to review your firmware versions, your technologies, and to have corresponding strategies. To get into a little bit more detail here, the general practice here is, of course, quite similar to that that we had earlier. So you want to have an inventory, you want to really understand your environment. Which versions of which software and hardware are you currently using? Where are they used? And in the next step, you want to have a review of your inventory and find out where there have been end-of-life announcements or similar announcements by vendors or by regulatory bodies that say that, for example, your operating system version is only supported for the next 3 years, for example. If you see that, then you want to act. You want to create a plan to upgrade this operating system version before the end of life comes, so that you ensure that your system that this operating system is running on still receives security updates during its lifetime, and that you don't run into a situation where the end of life is there, but you have no plan for migration, or your plan for migration is significantly longer and you have some period where your security and your compliance are at stake. Yes, this is basically the best practices for this requirement, and also for the last of our sub requirements. So now we have some time for a Q&A. If there's any questions, then please post them in the chat, or put them into the question functionality of GoToWebinar. Okay, it looks like there's no questions so far. So maybe while we're, maybe people are still defining their questions, I can point you to our next webinar. This one will be on mastering future dated requirements. Maybe I show the English version first. This is really about the future dated requirements in PCI 4.0. So as I've already mentioned, PCI 4.0 is already mandatory, but the new requirements will really kick in April 2025. And until then, of course, you want to prepare for those new requirements so that you don't have non-compliance or surprises in your audit. And in this webinar, my colleague will really guide you through those new requirements. One of them we've basically looked at today in depth. But here you will also get a lot of best practices and recommendations for efficient preparation. For all the other requirements. And the English version of this is on 27th of June, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. And there is also a German version of this webinar, also on 27th of June, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Additionally, I can only point you to follow us. There's the CST Academy news, and there's also the LinkedIn. And if you have any further questions, you can email me. By now, we also have a question that I can answer. So the question is it possible to review the last requirement and the exact number? Let me check if there's not. So the I think this was about the last sub requirement that we were looking at. So the number of the requirement here is 12.3.4. Hardware and software technologies in use are reviewed at least once every 12 months. Yes, I think this is also the correct requirement number, and I hope this answers the question. Yeah, so with that, I want to thank you, and as I said, if there's any further questions, feel free to email me. Yeah, and thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.